Heard any big political news lately? Well, depends on what news site you're on. I'm Scott Ott, and this episode of Bill Whittle Now is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And Bill, I had planned to talk to you about what seems to be the biggest news story in the political world right now, the laptop computer that suddenly showed up with thousands of emails on it, some of which seem to suggest that former Vice President Joe Biden's son, Hunter, arranged for a meeting with some people from an energy firm, Burisma, as we've heard before, to meet with the vice president and to have some sort of meeting with influencers in the Obama administration as well. It's not exactly clear whether the meeting took place because the Biden campaign denies that it did. Rather, let me say it this way. The Biden campaign says there's no record of such a meeting. Not exactly a denial that the meeting happened. But in any case, Bill, facts are changing moment by moment and more revelations will come pouring out hour by hour. What struck me as interesting is that I pulled up the front page of the New York Times website, which I happen to have here on my little electronic device. And I started scrolling through the New York Times because I thought, well, I wonder how the New York Times is covering this. Is it going to be different than the New York Post? Is it going to be different than Fox News? I certainly thought it would be. And it is different, Bill, in a very substantial way. It's not covered at all. I mean, maybe it's in here somewhere, but I did a lot of scrolling and a lot of tapping around in different sections of the paper. Bill, it really does seem like we live in two Americas when one of the leading stories at the Fox News website, for example, is this whole Hunter Biden, Joe Biden controversy, and everybody on the right's talking about it, and Twitter on the right is going insane about it. And the New York Times, it's as if it didn't happen.
Well, first of all, let me just get the snark out of the way. To say that the emails seem to suggest a collusion and a form of bribery and influence peddling is the same as dropping a wrench on the floor and saying that seems to suggest that the theory of gravity has some merit to it. And the same thing about the record of there's no did this happen? Did you have it? Well, there's no record of it. Well, there's no record of me driving to work here, actually. Maybe I'm still at home. So all of these weasel words are all just an indication that all of this stuff is true. Scotty, I'll just tell you this person to person because we haven't had a chance to talk about this at all prior to the taping. But this is the most disheartening thing I think I've seen in the time I've been doing this. And the reason I say that is because it has been my contention from the beginning, from like when I first was writing at Eject in 2003, that the internet might be able to save us in the sense that it would be the first time in these cycles of civilization where regular people could talk directly to each other and not go through this high priesthood of people who live in skyscrapers and by the barrel. And I really thought that was true. But it's not the New York Times not covering the story that bothers me. It's the fact that Twitter and Facebook, and obviously Google as well, YouTube, all of them, have struck, not labeled, which they don't have much of a right to do, not fact-checked, nothing, struck any reference to this at all. At all. And I've come to realize that the amount of control that big tech has over how information is dispersed is almost certainly insurmountable as we understand it. I don't know how we can get around this.
That said, Bill, and I agree that seems like an alarming thing, but if something like this happened the other way around, then I think that people on the right would be saying, oh, well, where was this mysterious laptop computer, which apparently the FBI has had in its possession since December of 2019. Suddenly it comes out a couple of weeks before the election because Rudy Giuliani took it to the New York Post because, as the left would portray it, he didn't want anybody fact-checking the story before they released it. As Giuliani would portray it, it's because he thought that the leftist media would tie it up and spend a whole bunch of time sort of investigating and sitting on the story until after the election. How do you know as a media platform like Twitter or Facebook, or frankly, as a publisher like the New York Times, when you don't have enough time to check out these kind of facts, whether it's imprudent or frankly destructive to American democracy to come out with a story like this that is yet to be substantiated?
Number one, there's any number of unsubstantiated stories that the Times ran with immediately. And so that argument I don't buy. Number two, this story has been around for 5 days now, something like that. That's plenty of time to check whether or not there's anything to this story. There's plenty of time to look at the emails in detail and so on. But much more importantly, number three, the difference between this and how I would feel if it was the other way around is that I watched President Trump get accused of collusion with Russia, for which they could produce not a particle of evidence. I watched an impeachment trial for which they could produce not a particle of evidence. Here are 3 hard drives, which is, in fact, a particle of evidence. And not only is there a particle of evidence, there is clear provenance. For those of you not familiar with the term, provenance is a chain of ownership. If I've got a painting and I tell you it's done by Leonardo da Vinci, people are going to ask me about its provenance. They're going to want to know, where was this painting before I got it? How do you know it came from Leonardo, and so on. In this particular case, my understanding of the story is that a guy who basically was in the computer repair business and a former Vietnam vet and a bit of a patriot basically got asked by Hunter Biden to repair 3 different laptops that had been damaged by water. The guy said one of them was irreparable. He was able to save the other 2. He called Hunter Biden, and said, please come and pick up your property. He did it again and again and again and again and again. Biden refused to pay him for this service. And when Biden didn't pick up the laptops, according to law, after 90 days, those property became the property of the guy who invested his time and money doing the repairs on the computer. Once it was clear that there were some interesting things on there, he notified the FBI. The FBI told him to go home and nothing to worry about. Then the FBI shows up, and then they want to do a mirror image of the hard drive, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. And he chucks it into the FBI as an American patriot, the guy who did the recovery. As a former military man in the United States of America, he trusted the FBI, turned this information over just the way any other patriot would have done before these days, before Barack Obama got a hold of the Department of Justice. And it disappeared into the maw of the FBI. And when it continued to disappear during the entire impeachment trial, when this drive never showed up, when all of these charges against Donald Trump were being raised, and it never, ever appeared, it became clear to this guy that handing information like this to the FBI is the same as handing information like this over to Hillary Clinton. And that's when he said, well, I guess the only thing we can do is get this to somebody who might know what to do with it. And he went to Donald Trump's counsel, who happened to be Rudy Giuliani. And there's your story. And there's your provenance. Now, if it turns out that this whole story is false, it should be an easy thing to prove. But when Joe Biden is asked about this and he says no comment, or he says things like there's no record of the meeting, then he understands that the worst thing that can happen in a situation like this is to be proven that you are lying. So he's not going to be proven lying. He's just going to say anything other than, no, didn't happen, absolutely no connection, and so on. He knows it's real. And when you hear people saying on the left that this is another Russian disinformation plot, you begin to realize just how pernicious and powerful and corrupt this entire Democratic Party media complex is, because half of the country out there thinks that Donald Trump colluded with the Russians when he didn't, because there's no evidence that he did. That's the kind of society we live in, innocent until proven guilty. Here is evidence that Hunter Biden took a big check from Burisma, took a big check from the governor of Moscow's wife. Here is hard case evidence, exactly as there was hard evidence in the case of Hillary Clinton's emails. And it simply goes down the memory hole. The FBI sits on it. The FBI doesn't do anything with it. And then the New York Times doesn't even report the story. And Twitter and Facebook and Google and all of them strike any reference to it, because they are determined to win this election, Scott. And if they win this election, they will win every other election from this point forward. If they're not broken up, it's all over.
Now, one could argue that this information that's coming out and continues to roll out provides evidence of some kind. The question, I guess, is, do we owe the former Vice President of the United States, a former U.S. Senator, and frankly, an American citizen, the presumption of innocence?
Yes, we do. Absolutely, we do. But we also owe we also owe the American people a legitimate investigation into what apparently is not just credible evidence, but compelling evidence. We have an obligation to that too. And nobody seems to have been hesitant to try any of Donald Trump or try Amy Barrett or Brett Kavanaugh, any of those people. They're tried in the court of public opinion. So yes, I think he deserves the presumption of innocence.
The Daily Beast says, Bill, related to this, and I'm quoting here from the Daily Beast, the 2 GOP Senate committees investigated the matter, meaning this matter regarding Joe and Hunter Biden, and concluded last month that Biden's vice presidency was a potential conflict of interest, but they found no conclusive evidence of wrongdoing. Is this laptop computer the conclusive evidence that they were missing?
Absolutely it is, yes, because my understanding is that there are references to the big guy, that there are references to him having to pay tons of money to dad who's going to lock the whole thing up. It is as smoking as a gun gets, which I think is why.
The big guy can be a lot of big guys.
Who else could it
be? Every story I read on the right that mentioned the big guy basically said, well, that must be Joe Biden.
Who else could be Hunter Biden's big guy? He is a cokehead. He is an absolute, complete 100% failure. He is an absolute wreck of a guy. Who else in the world could be the big guy? Who else in Hunter Biden's life could justify a $50,000 a year salary and all of these payments? Who else could it be? That is not an unreasonable assumption, and it's not a reach either, especially when you're talking about these emails revealing things like, well, I have to, half of this money goes to him and so on and so forth. There comes a point when there is so much smoke, you know there's a fire. Now, again, you're right, and you're right to point it out. The presumption of innocence is still there. But the presumption of innocence doesn't mean that we take evidence and chuck it into the middle of the river and weight it down with cement and have it go sleep with the fishes.
Well, why isn't the reaction, Bill, and when you hear that phrase, something like that, well, the big guy, why isn't the reaction, boy, that's interesting. We need to learn more so we can draw a conclusion based on facts other than my presumption that the big guy must mean Hunter's dad?
Well, the fact that the New York Times has not covered this story, even to expose it as a fraud, is an indication of the fact that we are in a death struggle with people who have no regard for the truth whatsoever and are determined to smother the news and kill it. Kill it dead. Stomp on it until it's dead, as long as they get what they want in the election. And it's not just the Times. The Times is irrelevant. The Times is a dinosaur. What happens at the Times concerns me not. The electronic suppression is all the evidence you need that these big tech companies are essentially propaganda outlets and that they are making absolute editorial decisions. They're not carriers. They control all aspects of our lives. They control more than electricity, because I can go out and buy a generator, provide my own electricity. I can't go provide my own internet. And on 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 it goes. So if we don't win this election, and if these tech giants are not broken up by force of law, then they will continue to do and continue to get better at what they're doing in this story. And this story, this Biden story, whether or not the allegations are true, the Biden story, regardless of whether Biden had anything to do with it or not, the way that the media has stomped on this story, the way that they've banned it, suppressed it, censored it, removed it, stripped it, whitewashed it, discredited it, all of it, that alone, that's the story. Not some third case of endless case of human corruption and influence peddling. That's not the story. The story is that every single means of information that the American people have at their disposal, with the exception of Fox News, yours truly, and a few other couple of places. When I say yours truly, I mean both of ours truly. That's it. That's all there is. And even though this message is getting out on the internet, I guarantee you, and we both know for a fact, we've watched our numbers get bigger and then drop, get bigger and then drop, get bigger and then drop. What can we do about it? Nothing. Our decision as conservatives to get onto other people's private property, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, was the largest mistake that we have made since the end of the Second World War. And I think the hour is late.
Final question, and I'm going to ask you to do a little play acting here. You did a little theater in college, so I'd like you to assume that you're now playing the part of an advisor, a top advisor to the campaign of Vice President Biden. These stories are coming out. You're not reading it, of course, in the papers that you subscribe to, but you know they're out there. How do you advise the former vice president and the guy who's leading in the polls, according to every mainstream media source? How do you advise him to handle this between now and the final election day?
Well, I would advise him to continue to take the advice of his advisors, because Joe Biden's not capable of doing anything. But I would continue to do what the campaign has been doing. I wouldn't talk about it. I wouldn't bring it up. When it does come up, I'd say, I can't believe you're part of this Russian collusion effort, which is what he did to a CBS reporter who accidentally asked him a question that had some, weight to it. For which that CBS journalist was routinely and roundly pilloried by his colleagues for having accidentally been a journalist. So I would tell him to do exactly the same thing. Just don't put any fuel on it. And whenever it comes up, just say it's all part of Vladimir Putin's plan to keep Donald Trump in the White House, the same way he put him in the White House. And that lie has continued to spread and grow. Half the country believes it. They are 100% convinced of it. And the fact that a Mueller probe after 2 years and $50 million and 500 witnesses didn't come up with any evidence has nothing to do with their opinion at all. Nothing whatsoever. The people who are claiming that this Biden thing is real are a bunch of those Fox News lunatics. And Fox News is a lying propaganda source, they say. You can look at all of this information on a table. You can just put it down on a table. You could take all the colors off of it and just look at it on a table. Accusation against Donald Trump. Is it true? Well, there's no evidence that it was. Accusation against Joe Biden. Is it true? Well, there's evidence that, in fact, his son did, in fact, enter into that kind of relationship. So, yes, there is evidence there. And it doesn't matter, because the American people have been told this lie so often and so frequently and so universally that their minds are made up, and there's nothing that you can do to change it. And so the two Americas continue to go their own way. And now, given the destruction of the integrity of the idea of an election day, we are now going to face an election that is going to be I don't know what's going to happen on election day. But no matter who wins, no one's going to be announced to be the winner, of course, not on election day. We won't know who's elected on election day, and we never will again, unless we go back to what we used to have, which is paper ballots and election day. So it'll fight and fight and fight. It'll be like what we saw in 2000 with George Bush, except many, many orders of magnitude worse. And the Democrats will do what they do. They'll continue to use the law when the law suits them, and they'll continue to ignore the law when it doesn't. And if it turns out that Donald Trump is elected, then they will do whatever they have to do to undermine the second term of his presidency. And if this conservative justice is confirmed, because we still have legitimate political power through the result of the ballot box, then if Biden wins, then he will pack the court. He'll simply say, well, we can't do anything without a majority on the court, so we'll just throw on another 5 or 10 or 20 or 300 liberal judges, and that's the end of that. That is the end of that.
Members of BillWhittle.com have made this program possible. We're grateful for their ongoing support. And if you have not yet become a member at BillWhittle.com, you're missing out on some backstage content that we produce for members only, and also content that the members themselves produce. And you, in fact, could become a content producer at BillWhittle.com. We invite you to do so. It's only about $10 a month, and you can sign up by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking that big green button that says Become a Member. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.